Come on, Howie, Chester said. Quit clowning around. We've got serious business to take care of. Who's clowning? Asked Howie, licking his lips. He ducked back down into the garbage pail, his voice calling out from its depths. There's some great stuff in here. Corn cobs, melon rinds, apple strudel, whipped cream. Oh, and here's a nice big juicy... And then all I could hear was a loud crunch. Chester sighed heavily. Harold, he muttered, could you do something about Howie, please? I believe I'm about to have heart palpitations. I looked at my friend Chester and shook my head. No one ever said it was easy being a father, I commented. Very funny, he replied. Now, would you please ask the kid to knock it off? I must admit my mouth was watering for a little bit of that apple strudel, but I decided it would have to wait. After all, my digestive tract would know no peace with Chester champing at the bit the way he was. I knocked on the side of the pail and entreated Howie to remove himself. Reluctantly, he agreed. Can you help me get out of here? He asked. I think my foot's stuck in a ketchup bottle or something. Here, I said, jumping up against the side of the pail. I'll pull you out. Just grab my neck. Chester backed away. Be careful you don't pull the whole thing, he was saying when my foot slipped on a banana skin and Howie must have thrown out earlier. Whoops, I cried. I fell back as Howie and the garbage pail came tumbling down. Howie flew past my head. The pail's contents spilled all over the floor. And Chester. And me. Nervously, I shot a glance to the front of the truck to see if the driver had heard the crash, but he must have been playing his radio really loudly, 'cause he didn't even turn around. When I turned back, Chester was staring at me. A watermelon rind sat on top of his head like an oversized beret. His face was plastered with the seeds. Gee, it looks like you've grown some freckles since I last saw you, I joked. Chester wasn't in a laughing mood. He shook off the remains of the watermelon and suggested I do the same with the tea bags and coffee grounds that adorned my head. Howie, meanwhile, was contentedly chewing on a steak bone that had landed at his side. Any more where that came from? I asked eagerly. Howie didn't reply. He was too busy slurping over his find. Later, Harold, later, Chester muttered. Right now we've got to see if we can find those vegetables. He gazed into the overturned pail. Wait a minute, he cried suddenly. There, next to those cans. Doesn't that look like a... I'm going to take a look around, Harold. Start checking the other pails. And he disappeared from sight. With Chester out of the way, I was all set to root through the garbage that was strewn about to see if I could find something good to eat, when the truck suddenly swerved to the right and my stomach lurched to the left. I groaned. There's nothing like a sudden case of car sickness, I thought, to knock the appetite right out of you. Boy, this bone is great, Howie remarked just then. It could use a little seasoning, though. Would you pass that jar of peanut butter, Uncle Harold? As the truck veered around a bend in the road, I moaned and batted the peanut butter jar toward Howie. Nauseated, I made my way toward a still-standing garbage pail and began snooping around. What do dead vegetables smell like? I wondered as I poked my nose under the lid. The odor of freshly cut grass greeted my nostrils. Oh no, I thought, a sudden rash of panic running through me. My hay fever! I could feel that familiar tingle at the end of my nose. Achoo! The lid of the garbage pail flipped over as hundreds of blades of grass sailed into the air. After riding the currents for a brief, liberating fling, they tumbled down, one after the other, to nestle into their new home on top of my head, sticking to the wet spot the coffee grounds had so recently made ready for them. Howie looked up from his repast and chuckled at what he saw. Gee, Uncle Harold, he said, you make a great title for a spy novel, The Dog in the Green Toupee. Achoo! I replied. Chester emerged from the pail just then, dragging in his teeth a stalk of celery. Boy, I said, trying to shake off the stubbornly clinging grass, you smell terrible. What'd you get into in there, anyway? You don't smell like a rose yourself, he said, dropping the celery. Anyway, it doesn't matter what else is in there. The important thing is that I found the white vegetables, or some of them at least. I'll bring out the rest, and then we can get to work. Chester withdrew once again into the inner recesses of the pail, only to return several times with various specimens of vegetable specters. He laid them out neatly on the floor of the truck, his appraising eye passing over each in turn. How do you know that celery is one of the culprits? I asked. After all, celery is white to begin with. Well, sometimes, Chester said. And sometimes it's green. Anyway, we can't be too careful. We wouldn't want to leave a killer celery stalk on the loose, now would we? Well, I hope you're right, I muttered. If not, we may be getting a phone call from the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Vegetables. Thank goodness we found them in time, Chester went on with a sigh. Howie, bring the toothpicks over here. Howie glanced up from his bone, a look of bewilderment on his face. Toothpicks? He asked. Yes. Howie, his lips covered with peanut butter, smiled weakly. I think I forgot them, Pop. I must have left them back in the garden behind Max's house. Gee, I'm sorry. The tip of Chester's tail tapped the floor nervously. Great, he said. That's just great. Now what are we gonna do? Well, I replied, before your heart palpitations start up again, I think I have a solution. Inside that pail over there, I went on, indicating the one that had exploded its contents all over my head, there are a lot of twigs. They're a little big for the job, but I don't see any reason we couldn't use them instead of the toothpicks. Chester considered my suggestion and, after a moment's reflection, nodded solemnly. I like it, he said. It's natural, organic, back to the earth. Thoreau would have been proud of you, Harold. Well, I wasn't sure what Thoreau had to do with it. In fact, I wasn't sure who Thoreau was, though I had a sneaking suspicion he once pitched for the Yankees. But I decided to accept Chester's response with modest appreciation. After all, a compliment from Chester is something like a shooting star. Rare, and if you blink, there's a good chance you'll miss it. We picked out several likely candidates for statehood from among the twigs, and, with great ceremony, drove them through the hearts of the vampirical veggies. We were admiring our work when all at once we heard a loud bang! They're shooting! Howie cried. He covered his ears with his paws. Don't let him get me, Uncle Harold, he whimpered. I'll give them back their steak bone. I didn't mean to take it. Honest, I didn't. Just don't let them shoot me. I'm too young to die. I'm too nice to die. I'm too... me to die. Will you cut that out? Chester snapped. Nobody's shooting. How can you be sure? I asked. Maybe there's a law against stabbing vegetables with twigs in the back of a moving pickup truck. I lowered myself to the floor, getting out of the line of fire. I became aware that our ride had become very bumpy, and that we were slowing down. The truck pulled off the road and rolled unevenly to a complete stop. Before we could figure out what was going on, the driver jumped out and walked to the rear end of the truck. Great, I heard him mumble. A flat, just what I needed. He lowered the tailgate. Well, he went on, I'll just get the spare and... Well, what have we here? I looked up to see him staring straight at me. I tried to smile. Where did you come from? He asked, startled. Don't ask me, I thought. They're the experts on reproduction. He stood there scratching his head. Boy, what a mess you've made. Come on, get out of there. Let's go. He swatted at us, indicating in his unsubtle way that the ride was over. For my part, it didn't take much persuading. I was relieved our little adventure had come to an end. Between the garbage and the hay fever and the car sickness, I was delighted to say goodbye to the truck and feel solid ground underfoot once again. As the three of us walked along the highway toward town, I said to Chester, I'll be glad to get home. So will we all, Chester said wearily. So will we all. But first... Yeah, I know, I said. Destiny calls. Exactly. Harold! Chester! A distant voice cried out. We stopped in our tracks. Chester? I said, shaking slightly. Did you hear? Yes, Harold! The voice called again. Chester! Chester's eyes went wild. It isn't Max this time, he said. It really must be. Then we heard the sound of someone laughing. We turned and saw Howie standing several feet behind us, a grin plastered on his face from ear to ear. Boy, Pop, boy, Uncle Harold, he really fell for it. Chester and I looked at each other. Harold, can't you do a better job of keeping the kid in line? Chester asked me as we resumed walking. I don't know, Chester, I replied. He's your son. And Howie kept chuckling all the way into town.